My name is Inez Whitcomb, 34 years old. The butterfly streamers still tremble in the Texas dusk, catching the last shimmer of sunlight like torn ribbons of gold. There's frosting on my sleeve, lavender and sugar, and I haven't washed it off. The smell of vanilla clings to my skin, stubborn and sweet, mocking the ruin that hangs in the air. 2 hours ago, this backyard was filled with laughter. Now it feels like a crime scene. My hands still shake as I grip the fence behind me, trying to steady the tremor in my breath. The camera light blinks red, waiting. I look straight into it because if I don't speak this out loud, I might start pretending it never happened. Behind me, the butterfly decorations sway above the table where my twin girls blew out their candles. They are only 8, too young to understand cruelty disguised as honesty, too old to forget it. Earlier this afternoon, 50 guests filled our backyard. A sea of faces, bright dresses, the hum of children and music. My husband, Rod, had spent the morning stringing orange and purple streamers between the trees while I set up the craft station for the kids. Even Gloria, my mother-in-law, had shown up early, carrying a box of porcelain plates and that practiced smile that always felt more like an audit than affection. She inspected every detail, napkins, frosting, the height of the balloon arch, then adjusted a tablecloth that didn't need adjusting. "I suppose this will do," she said, and her pearl necklace caught the light like a judgment. Of course, when Donovan's Theodore turned 8, they had an astronaut party with a professional planner. But homemade has its own charm, doesn't it? I told myself to breathe. Rod had warned me. "She won't change overnight," he'd said, looping his arm around me earlier that week. "Let her help with the garden. Maybe it's her way of trying." Maybe. Because 3 weeks earlier, Gloria had spent an entire afternoon in the dirt with our girls. She'd arrived in jeans, hair tied back, hands ready, helping them plant milkweed and lavender for the butterfly garden. The sight of her kneeling beside Juniper, showing her how to tuck the roots gently into the soil, had stunned me. I'd watched from the kitchen window, my chest tight with a fragile kind of hope. Maybe she really was softening. Maybe the years of small wounds, comments about real family, the backhanded praise, the subtle exclusion, were behind us. I'd even texted my sister Camille that night. She might actually be changing. But the thing about people who thrive on control is they don't let go. They just wait for a bigger audience. By the time the party began, everything sparkled. Harold, my father-in-law, had built 2 butterfly houses from wood, painted in the twins' favorite colors. "For my little butterflies," he'd said, setting them among the milkweed. Rod's assistant coach had come with his wife and baby. Neighbors brought pies. My sister Camille drove from Houston, wearing a sun hat and sarcasm. The highlight came during the butterfly release. 50 painted ladies fluttered into the sky, wings glinting like tiny stained glass windows. One landed right on Juniper's nose. Maggie stretched her hands out, and 3 butterflies chose her palms as their throne. I'd never seen them so radiant. Even Gloria smiled, an actual smile, and for a moment I believed we'd made it through. We hadn't. Cake time came. 50 voices sang, "Happy Birthday." Rod leaned over to light the candles. I looked at my daughters, their faces glowing in the flicker, and felt this swell of peace, brief, dangerous peace. Then came the sound of a fork tapping against glass. Clink, clink, clink. The singing faltered, the chatter dimmed. Gloria stood at the head of the table, her wineglass raised, her eyes glinting like she'd waited her entire life for this stage. "Before we celebrate," she began, "I think it's time for some honesty in this family." Rod's hand found mine under the table, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "Mom, don't!" he hissed. But she didn't even glance at him. She turned toward the crowd, voice clear and commanding, the same tone she'd used for years managing the bank. "For 8 years, I've watched my son play house with children who aren't his. I've stayed silent while everyone pretends this is normal, but I can't anymore." My stomach dropped. A few guests exchanged looks. Someone's nervous laugh broke and died. "These girls," she said, gesturing toward my daughters, "aren't real grandchildren. They're strangers. Babies my son's wife used to trap him because she couldn't give him biological ones." The words hit like a bullet. Juniper froze, her small hand halfway to her face. Maggie whimpered, confused. I wanted to move, say something, anything, but the air had thickened, heavy as tar. Rod stood up so fast his chair scraped across the deck. "How dare you?" His voice cracked through the silence. They're not your daughters, Gloria snapped, wine sloshing from her glass. They're someone else's cast-offs. You're raising another woman's mistake because your wife is... She hesitated, then spat it out. Defective. The crowd gasped. Camille shot to her feet. Enough, Gloria. You need to leave. This is my son's house, Gloria retorted, chin trembling. I'll leave when I'm finished. I could feel every pair of eyes on us. Parents pulling their children closer. Mrs. Washburn whispering something about poor girls. Even Harold looked paralyzed, his mouth half open. Then a sound, soft but certain, cut through the tension. Grandma, Juniper's voice. She stood up on her chair, her butterfly dress catching the late light. Her eyes, usually shy and downcast, were steady now. Grandma, she said again, should I tell everyone your secret? The one you told me never to repeat? The backyard went completely still. Gloria's face drained of color. The wineglass slipped from her hand and shattered on the stones. What did you just say? She whispered, her voice trembling. Juniper didn't flinch. You told me about a secret, about a sister named Rosemary, remember? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Gloria's breath caught, her lips moving without sound. No, darling, you're mistaken. That was a story. It wasn't a story, Juniper said softly, but her words carried like wind through the trees. You were crying when you told me. You said you hurt her, and that's why it hurts to love us. Maggie's small hand slipped into mine. My pulse thundered in my ears. Rod stepped forward. Mom, he said slowly, what is she talking about? Gloria backed away from the table, shaking her head. Nothing. It's nothing. Harold's voice broke the silence, low but firm. Gloria. She stopped. In 40 years of marriage, he said, I have never seen you look this afraid. What have you been hiding? The guests were frozen. Camille, I noticed distantly, had her phone out, filming. The sun dipped lower, and the backyard fell into a strange twilight, a world split between innocence and confession. Gloria's pearl necklace glimmered at her throat as her shoulders sagged. Please, she whispered, not here. Juniper climbed down from her chair and walked across the patio, small feet crunching over fallen cake crumbs and broken glass. She took her grandmother's trembling hand. You said I reminded you of her, Juniper said. You said her name was Rosemary. You said you did something terrible. Gloria's knees gave out. She sank into a chair, hands covering her face, the sound of her sobs filling the silence where music used to be. And I knew then, whatever this was, it wasn't just an old family story. It was the crack in the foundation, the rot that had been waiting under years of politeness and parties. The girls stood beside her, two small silhouettes against the last streaks of orange light, as if guarding both the wound and the truth it demanded. Something had been buried here, and tonight it was coming back to life. Gloria's sobs echoed against the fence, raw and dissonant beneath the fading hum of cicadas. The guests, unsure whether to leave or linger, froze in the strange silence that follows disaster. Someone's child began crying, a high, frightened sound, and a few parents finally gathered their things and slipped out through the side gate. The rest stayed, drawn by that terrible gravity families have when secrets start to surface. Rod crouched beside his mother, his voice taut. Mom, talk to me. What did you tell my daughter? Gloria shook her head, the words caught somewhere between pride and panic. It was just a story, a silly story. She misunderstood. But Harold was watching her with an expression I'd never seen before, half fear, half recognition. Gloria, he said quietly, is there something you need to tell us? Juniper was still standing close, her small hand resting on Gloria's arm. Maggie had stopped crying and watched wide-eyed, as if waiting for a bedtime story that had suddenly turned real. Gloria lowered her hands from her face. Her lipstick had smeared into the lines around her mouth, her mascara leaving dark trails down her cheeks. For once, she looked nothing like the immaculate woman who ran Sunday dinners like corporate board meetings. I can't do this, she whispered. Yes, you can, Harold said, stepping forward, because you already started. The weight of his voice pinned her. For a moment, she just stared at the grass, her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Then, like something breaking inside her, she exhaled. Her name was Rosemary. The air shifted, even the wind seemed to pause. I had a twin sister, Gloria said. Not by birth. She was adopted. My parents couldn't have another child after me, and when I was 2 months old, they brought her home. They dressed us alike, told everyone we were twins. For years, we were the Piton girls, Gloria and Rosemary. We were inseparable, or at least we looked that way. Rod blinked hard. You never told us that. I told no one, she said. I made sure of it. She stared past us, her voice growing distant, almost trance-like. Rosemary was radiant. The kind of girl everyone loved without trying. She was kind, funny, always humming. She could paint anything, birds, flowers, people. Our room was covered in her drawings. She had this one of butterflies pinned above her bed, orange wings, black edges, so detailed you could almost feel them moving. Gloria swallowed hard, as if tasting the years she'd swallowed whole. I hated that painting. I hated how everyone adored her for it, even my parents, especially them. Her words dropped like stones into the quiet yard. She wasn't like me. She was adopted, but they never treated her that way. If anything, they loved her more. I thought being the real daughter should have meant something. Camille had lowered her phone now, no longer filming. She looked pale, torn between disgust and pity. I was 15, Gloria went on. There was a boy, Daniel Morrison, the quarterback, the golden boy. I liked him all year. He barely noticed me. But at the spring dance, he asked her, not me. He told her she was beautiful, that I was ordinary. A murmur passed through the onlookers. Harold closed his eyes, shaking his head. When we got home, she tried to comfort me. She said it didn't mean anything, that she'd rather have spent the night with me and our friends. I didn't believe her. I told her she wasn't my real sister. I told her she was just some charity case my parents had dragged home, that her real mother probably didn't want her. Rod's voice cracked. Mom! Gloria flinched but continued, her tone growing hoarse. I said she was stealing my life, my parents, my friends, everything that should have been mine. I told her she'd never be real family, that she was an imposter. The crowd collectively exhaled, a horrified sound. I could feel Juniper trembling beside me. That night, Gloria whispered, she ran away, climbed out the window with her backpack and the $30 from her piggy bank, left a note that said, if I'm not real family, I won't burden you anymore. Thank you for pretending. A sob tore out of her. We found her 2 weeks later in Oklahoma City, living under a bridge. She was 15. 15. She wouldn't speak to me, not one word. My parents brought her home, but it was like living with a ghost. She'd leave rooms when I entered. She stopped smiling, stopped painting. Gloria's gaze found the twins, her voice cracking again. And I told myself I didn't care. I convinced myself I was right, that blood mattered more than love, because if I wasn't right, then I was the monster who broke my own sister. Harold knelt beside her, his hands trembling. Why didn't you ever tell me? In 40 years, Gloria, not one word. Because I erased her, Gloria said, and the words came out like a confession at the gallows. After she died. Rod's breath hitched. She died? Gloria nodded slowly. When she turned 19, a car accident. She'd finally moved out, got a job at a bookstore. A drunk driver hit her. She was gone instantly. And the last thing she ever heard from me was that she wasn't real family. The weight of that hung heavy, unbearable. Even the cicadas had gone silent. At the funeral, Gloria continued, her voice a whisper, someone told me she'd been volunteering at an adoption center, helping other adopted kids feel loved. She told them being chosen made them special. She spent her last 4 years undoing the damage I caused. Juniper's eyes filled with tears. Grandma, she said softly, that's why you cried when we planted the butterflies. You said they reminded you of someone. Gloria reached for her granddaughter's hand, her voice breaking. Yes, because Rosemary loved butterflies. She said they were proof that something broken could still become beautiful. When you and Maggie started talking about them, it felt like she'd come back to haunt me. Every time I looked at you two, I saw her eyes, her gentleness, her courage, and it terrified me. I knelt down beside Juniper and Maggie. Sweethearts, maybe we should go inside, I murmured. But Juniper shook her head. She said we weren't family, Mama, she whispered. But she's the one who doesn't believe what she did was wrong. Rod's jaw tightened. Mom, he said, his voice calm now. Too calm. You've punished my daughters for years because you couldn't forgive yourself. Gloria didn't deny it. Yes, she said simply. I thought if I convinced everyone else that blood was all that mattered, maybe I'd start believing it too. But I never did. Every time I looked at your girls, I saw Rosemary, the sister I betrayed, and I hated myself for it. So I took it out on them. Her eyes met mine then, and for the first time there was no venom, only exhaustion. I told myself I was protecting our family's legacy, but the truth is I was protecting my shame. No one spoke for a long time. The evening light bled into indigo, and the first stars appeared over the fence. The guests began to drift away silently, murmuring soft goodbyes. Gloria's voice trembled again. Harold, Rod, Inez, I am so sorry. I've spent 40 years punishing everyone who reminded me of what I did. My parents, you, these children. I can't undo it, but I can tell the truth now. She turned toward Juniper and Maggie, reaching out both hands. You are my granddaughters. You are my family. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. Juniper stepped closer and placed her small hand in Gloria's palm. Then stop hiding, she said, because secrets hurt everyone. Gloria broke down again, clutching both girls to her chest. You're right, sweetheart, she sobbed. You're right. I stood behind them, watching the 3 generations locked together, pain, regret, innocence, all tangled like roots under the same tree. The porch light flickered on, casting a glow that made their shadows stretch long across the grass. And as I looked at Gloria, her perfect armor shattered, her tears streaking down a face that had only ever known control, I realized something unsettling. The story wasn't finished. Because guilt that deep doesn't just confess, it clings. And somewhere inside her apology, I could feel it. There was still more she hadn't said. The backyard had emptied, but the air hadn't moved on. Paper cups lay crushed in the grass, half-melted ice cream smeared into the deck boards, and one pink balloon, still stubbornly inflated, bobbed against the fence like it hadn't realized the party was over. We stayed outside long after the last guest slipped away. No one wanted to speak first. Rod sat on the edge of a chair that leaned slightly on one leg, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. Camille stood by the folding table, stacking plates mechanically. Even Harold, steady Harold, was staring into the middle distance, like he'd fallen through some hole in time. Gloria was still in the same chair where she'd collapsed, her lavender dress stained with wine and dirt. The twins sat cross-legged in front of her, their butterfly wings made of tulle and glitter drooping around their shoulders. For once, she didn't tell them to sit up straight or fix their hair. She just stared at them as though memorizing faces she was afraid to lose. I knelt beside Rod and touched his arm. You need water, I whispered. He didn't look at me. I don't even know who she is, he said quietly. All these years I thought she was just difficult, proud. But she's been living with that, with all of that? It doesn't excuse it, I said. No, he agreed, but it explains the way she looks at me, like I'm proof she doesn't deserve peace. Gloria must have heard him. She lifted her head, voice trembling. You do deserve peace, Rod. You and those girls deserve peace from me, most of all. Camille set the last of the plates down with a clatter. Peace doesn't mean forgiveness, she said flatly. You don't just get to unload 40 years of secrets in one afternoon and call it healing. Cam, I murmured, but she shook her head. No, Inez, someone needed to say it. You've spent 8 years letting her slice you open with a smile. Gloria flinched, but didn't argue. You're right, she whispered. I've been cruel, because cruelty is easier than guilt. The words hung between us. Juniper climbed into my lap, resting her head on my shoulder. Mama, she said softly, is Grandma bad? I hesitated. No, I said finally. Just broken. And sometimes broken people break others before they realize what they've done. From across the table, Harold let out a long breath. We all chose silence, didn't we? I let her rewrite history because I thought she needed protecting. I saw the gaps, photo albums that start at 16, boxes that vanished when we moved. But I didn't ask. He turned to Gloria. You let me marry a stranger. 40 years of pretending you didn't have a sister, of telling our children you were an only child. Why? Gloria's hands trembled. Because if I spoke her name out loud, I would have to face who I became after I drove her away. You married a woman who'd built her life out of erasure, and I thought love could hide it. It didn't, Harold said quietly. Rod stood, pacing now. We can't just bury this again. Not after what happened today. I'm not asking you to, Gloria said, her voice rough. I'll tell whoever needs to hear it. I'll see a therapist, a priest, a judge, if that's what it takes. Just please, don't let the girls think I hate them. Juniper peeked out from my shoulder. We don't think that anymore, she said. You just need to learn how to love us better. Maggie nodded solemnly beside her. And not talk mean at birthdays. It drew a small, shaky laugh from everyone. Even Gloria smiled through tears. For a few moments, the world softened. The heat broke. A cool wind drifted through the trees, stirring the torn streamers like ghosts exhaling. Camille sighed. All right, Enough confessions for one night. Rod, help me with the trash before the raccoons get to it. They moved around the yard, gathering cups and paper plates, the rhythmic scrape of cleanup filling the silence where grief had been. Harold went inside and returned with a blanket. He draped it gently around Gloria's shoulders. You need to rest, he said, his voice gentler now. I don't deserve rest, she whispered. You don't get to decide that, he said. You just start again. I followed him onto the porch once the twins were inside brushing their teeth. The night smelled of smoke and sugar, a faint trace of burnt candles. Harold leaned on the railing, eyes glistening. She used to have a necklace, he said after a while, a little silver charm shaped like a butterfly. I asked about it once, years ago. She said she lost it. Rosemary's? I asked. He nodded. I think she kept it until we got married. Then one day it was just gone, like everything else before me. He rubbed his forehead. You know, there were nights I caught her standing by the window crying. I thought it was postpartum depression. Maybe it was ghosts. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. After a long pause, he turned to me. Promise me you won't let this fester the way she did. Secrets rot people, Inez, even the small ones. I know, I said. We both looked toward the garden, where the butterfly houses Harold had built glowed under the porch light. Two tiny silhouettes, Juniper and Maggie, peeked from their bedroom window, watching us. Gloria stood in the yard, staring up at them. Her face was pale, but her eyes clear in a way I hadn't seen before. She lifted her hand in a hesitant wave. The twins waved back. Something fragile and alive passed between them, something that might, in time, become forgiveness. Inside, the house was chaos again. The twins needed bedtime stories. Camille was trying to fix the broken faucet. Rod had locked himself in the den, staring at the wall. I sat on the couch, exhaustion creeping into my bones. The night felt too quiet, too still. Then I heard the faint rumble of the mailbox lid closing. Outside, by the porch light, lay a padded envelope. No return address, just Gloria's name, printed in neat handwriting. I brought it inside, heart thudding. Mom, I called softly back, you got something. She looked confused, then wary. From who? There's no sender, I said, but the postmark's from Oklahoma City. Her breath hitched. Oklahoma? I handed her the envelope. She turned it over, fingers trembling, then set it down on the table as if it might explode. I can't open it tonight, she said. Why not? Rod asked, stepping out from the den, voice gravelly. Because whatever it is, it's from the place she disappeared to, Gloria whispered. And if I open it, I'll have to face that part of her still exists somewhere. I thought I buried it all. Maybe I didn't. The clock ticked. The twins padded out in their pajamas, sleepy-eyed, clutching stuffed butterflies. Juniper looked at the envelope. Maybe it's something good, she said softly. Grandma, sometimes mail brings nice surprises. Gloria smiled faintly, a tear sliding down her cheek. Maybe it does, Junebug. The house settled into a long, heavy quiet. Outside, the garden shimmered faintly under the moonlight. A single butterfly, impossible, this late in the season, fluttered past the window, pale wings glinting silver before disappearing into the night. No one spoke, we just watched it vanish. Because we all felt it, the world shifting, waiting for something we didn't yet understand. The envelope sat unopened on the table between us, humming with the weight of what was coming next. Morning came slow, the kind that crept through blinds and landed in thin strips across the floor like hesitant light. The house was silent, except for the coffee machine groaning to life and the occasional shuffle of slippers. I found Gloria already awake, sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, the unopened envelope in front of her. She didn't look up when I entered. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, her face pale and bare of makeup. The lavender dress from last night hung on the back of a chair, wrinkled and stained. You didn't sleep, I said. She gave a humorless laugh. I haven't really slept in 40 years. The envelope sat between us like a live wire. Harold hovered nearby, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Do you want me to open it for you? I asked. No. Gloria took a slow breath. If Rosemary found a way to speak again, I need to hear it myself. She tore the seal carefully, as though afraid to break what waited inside. A small stack of papers slid out, letters, brittle and yellowed at the edges. On top was a short note written in delicate cursive. Patricia, Gloria read aloud. Her roommate at the adoption center. She swallowed. She kept these. Harold leaned closer. What does it say? Gloria's voice trembled as she read. Dear Mrs. Peaton, I've debated writing this for years. Rosemary talked about you every single day. She loved you until her last one. She kept a photo of you both in butterfly costumes, Halloween, age 10. She said she forgave you long before you ever asked. Gloria's breath hitched. She forgave me. Harold pulled out the photograph tucked behind the letter. It was small, faded, the two girls grinning in matching orange wings, freckles and sunlight caught forever in the grain. Gloria traced the edges with her fingers, her tears landing on the paper like drops of rain. I thought I burned this picture, she whispered. I thought I burned everything. I rested a hand over hers, but she didn't let herself disappear. For the first time since the party, Gloria smiled, not the brittle, perfect smile she wore like armor, but something quiet, human, almost fragile. Then I won't disappear either, she said. Not like that. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her coffee. I'm going to get help, real help. And she did. Weeks turned into months, the rhythm of our lives rearranging itself around the slow work of repair. Gloria began therapy twice a week, sitting on a leather couch with a notebook full of revelations and apologies. She joined a support group for adoptive grandparents, listening more than she spoke. At first, the twins were wary. They'd flinch when Gloria reached to hug them, unsure if the warmth was real, but she was patient. She showed up to every soccer game, every school concert, clapping until her palms turned red. She stopped comparing them to Donovan's children, stopped correcting their manners with that sharp edge of superiority. And when she slipped, as old habits sometimes do, she caught herself. That's the old Gloria, she'd say, exhaling it. Let me try again. Harold started to change too. He became softer, more present. He took to repairing the butterfly houses every weekend, repainting them in brighter colors. Rod and I would watch him from the porch as Gloria knelt beside him, trimming plants, her hands steady and ungloved. One Saturday, she came to us with a proposal. I want to rebuild the garden properly, she said. For Rosemary, for the girls, for all of us. We hired a landscaper from the botanical garden. They planted milkweed, lantana, purple coneflower, all native species that would keep butterflies returning year-round. In the center, Gloria placed a white bench and a small bronze plaque. It read, "For Rosemary, who taught us that love makes a family," and for Juniper and Magnolia, who reminded us. The twins helped her polish the metal until it gleamed. Now when the butterflies come, Maggie said proudly, they'll know where to sit. Juniper smiled. Maybe Rosemary will visit too. Gloria's eyes glistened, but she only nodded. I hope she does, sweetheart. The transformation wasn't perfect. Healing never is. There were still moments when tension crackled, when Rod couldn't meet his mother's eyes, or when Gloria's voice carried that old tone before she caught herself mid-sentence. But change lived in those pauses. It was in the quiet breath before apology, in the choice to stay at the table instead of walking away. 2 months later, Gloria began volunteering at the same adoption support center Rosemary had worked with decades earlier. She helped other grandparents navigate their fears and prejudices, speaking openly about her past. Her story spread. She became something of a quiet advocate, a woman learning how to love better, even after the damage. One evening, she called me to the porch. There's something I want to show you, she said. She held out a letter, new paper, neat handwriting. It's from the state archives, she explained. They found Rosemary's volunteer records. She signed every file with the same phrase. Gloria handed it to me. At the bottom of the page, written in looping ink, were the words, "Chosen is not less than born." Gloria's voice broke. She wrote that hundreds of times. Every child she helped, she gave them those words. I looked at her, at the way the sunset caught the silver in her hair. Maybe now you're finishing what she started. She smiled faintly. Maybe she sent those butterflies back to make sure I would. The twins came running out into the yard, laughing, their voices carrying into the golden light. Maggie pointed upward. Mama, look! A cloud of monarchs drifted over the fence. Dozens of them, wings flashing orange and black. They circled above the garden, then began to land on the milkweed, on the bench, on the carved letters of Rosemary's name. Gloria stood there frozen, her hand pressed to her heart. She came home, she whispered. Rod slipped his arm around my shoulders. Juniper climbed onto the bench, watching the butterflies dance. Grandma, she said softly, they remembered where to go. Gloria nodded, tears shining in her eyes. They always do, sweetheart. Family always finds its way back. As the sky dimmed, the butterflies lifted again, their wings catching the light like tiny pieces of stained glass. They rose higher and higher until they were only flecks of color against the deepening blue. We watched them go, the garden quiet except for the sound of wind through the milkweed. And in that silence, I realized what had changed. It wasn't just Gloria, it wasn't even the garden. It was all of us, learning that love doesn't erase pain, it transforms it, like a chrysalis breaking open, fragile and new. Because sometimes what looks like an ending is really the start of flight.